it's been a rough year for these fellows that are going to come up next. They've lost many rock and roll idols this year, as you probably know. But more importantly for these gentlemen, they've lost some dear friends and fellow bandmates of the iconic and storied local group Satan and the Dmen. They were good and generous men who shared a love of music and a deep sense of community, and they will be missed. But right now, I'd like to welcome Terry Stiles and Russ Percy to the stage for an informal sort of conversation about the local history of bands and venues since rock and roll became popular in the 60s. And I've got a little note here for myself to once again. Oh, Terry's wearing his team shirt there. Oh, they both are team jerseys. And I'm supposed to plug their book, which is available at the table on your way out. So please. And, oh, geez, shameless. Also available at Lake of the Woods Museum. While you're there getting your 5 Roses cookbook, you can grab a Satan and the Demon. Yes, welcome. Welcome to Common Ground. Big hand, everybody. See, on my right, your left, Terry Stiles.
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce myself, Russ Percy and Terry Stiles, and we're members of the band Satan and the Dmen. And we're here to give a little bit of an overview as to what was going on in this community and other communities like Winnipeg from 1962 to about 1966. So we'll start off with Terry, who's going to do the intro to his part of the speech. And thank you all for staying so late. It's nice to see you guys here. It is 3 o'clock. Go ahead.
Oh my.
Cute.
It is no surprise that I would lean towards my music as my biological father, Gordon Stiles, had played double bass in the Hal Linder Orchestra in the 1930s and 40s in Kenora, and many times at the Old Rowing Club. And my mother was quite accomplished at the piano. As I entered my teenage years, I put my hockey and baseball participation behind me and spent much time listening to my expanding record collection and learning the words to the most popular songs. Much more time, in fact, than I was spending on my schoolwork, which didn't please my parents all that much. I finally was able to convince them that an electric guitar and amplifier was necessary, and promised them that I would not neglect my studies, practice guitar faithfully, and learn how to play it well. And so, like many back then, out came the Sears catalog, and my first electric guitar and amplifier was purchased.
My musical background started at home with my dad, who loved to sing tenor, and my mother, Doris, who played piano. As a baby boomer, the rock and roll phenomenon coincided with our coming of age 12 and 13, and what an effect it had on music everywhere. Rock and roll became the devil's music for some, but for others, the music was magic. Night was the best time to listen to rock and roll in the old days, right there. And we used to have little rocket radios that we listened to. It was the best time to listen due to the fact that the signals of the radio stations in the United States were tuned north and south instead of east and west, as in the daytime. This made it much easier for us in Canada to hear music on distant stations, even though they were thousands of miles away. With Canada being north of the United States, we had a strong nighttime radio signal, and our favorite stations would include WLS in Chicago, WDGY in Minneapolis, and even those from as far away as Little Rock, Arkansas. No, we sure didn't mind bedtime at all. When our lights were turned out for the night, in went our earphones, and on came our radio in an effort to discover more and more new rock and roll music that we had never heard before. At the same time, tourism from the United States was growing quickly in our area, so we played the music for them that was popular back in the States. So we became kind of a jukebox band.
Not only did Kenora have bands playing their share of rock and roll, but long-term established groups such as Pearl Bannister's Western Airs and Verna Mackey's orchestra had to be considered as well each time a specific engagement was planned. The Flamingos were comprised of three very talented brothers from Keewatin, Ontario, named Bert, Edmund, and Fred Plessy. I don't believe I have ever seen a drummer who could match Freddie's playing. His drum rolls were so fast that they were nearly blinding, and when he did a drum solo, all one could do was shake their heads in disbelief. The Flamingos were fantastic, and a band I have never forgotten. Such a shame that playing music long-term wasn't their future.
Another band that was playing around Kenora was just a duo. The Laurentians were a duo made up of Bill Hoffmeister and Don Camiri, and together they played to a folkier audience. They both played acoustic guitars and sang very well.
Earlier on in my musical career, one of my neighbors on Regina Avenue was Ted Cabrera. He would hear me playing my guitar on my back steps and would say that one day he hoped he'd be able to play guitar as well. Well, eventually, Ted did purchase a guitar and amplifier of his own, practiced a lot, and was a quick learner. Within a short time, he was playing well enough to form a band called the Guild. Different members of the Guild over the years were Ted Cabrera, Gary Lapworth, Wayne Prisnick, Dave Carney, Don Phillips, Jim Davies, and Don Bezant. Ted became a tremendous guitarist who eventually recorded much of his guitar work in his music room at home.
My beginnings in a band was with Sherman Murphy, Mike Conaby, Jimmy Rivers, and lead singer Bruce Pringle. This group, called the Lakers, morphed into another group called the XLs and included Johnny Rose on vocals, Dennis Lindsay on lead guitar, Paul Fortier on bass, Jimmy Rivers on rhythm guitar, Mike Sroback on drums, and myself on keyboards. With a repertoire of Rolling Stones and Beatles songs, we played mostly the same songs as the Tempests, which was our competitive band. It was during this time in 1964 that I had the good fortune of playing with a local kid who played a hot rock guitar and had plenty of drive. I would have more than one opportunity to play with Billy Joe Green from Shoal Lake, who had come to Kenora to visit. In August of 1965 in Winnipeg, the XLs, the band I was in, played at the Metropolitan Theatre on a Friday night, Saturday morning, and an afternoon. That's when we met a fellow by the name of Neil Young. He kindly showed our lead guitar player, Dennis Lindsay, how to play a song called Made in England by Chad Allen and the Expressions. A wonderful experience and a very, very nice person. Passing the torch.
I'm not going to fight with it. My first band was called the Teen Beats, with two other fellows from Lakeside named Blair Swanson and Paul Fortier. However, after playing a few engagements without a drummer, it became obvious that making any sort of progress was going to be difficult. My eyes were always open for a chance to further my musical career. So after a short stint with the Lakers, I met two fellows in high school named Wayne Cardinal and Wayne Faulkner. They practiced regularly and were quite interested in taking on another guitar player and forming a band. I remembered meeting John Karwacki in high school a couple of years previous. John was quite willing to become the member we so desperately needed. The Tempests were born. Within a short period of time, we also added George Jones as a guest vocalist. We played the instrumentals, and George sang the vocals. We played everywhere in Kenora, Keewatin, and northwestern Ontario. Just in time for the British invasion, all of us would take turns doing vocals as well, as George wasn't able to attend each and every dance, and vocals had now become a large part of the evening's entertainment. We would shortly appear twice on a talent show on Channel 7 television in Winnipeg, which was a tremendous introduction to the kids in the city who watched the program regularly. For a short while, we added 3 female singers to our ranks we called the Temptations. These beauties were Trudy Wilson and Denise and Della Burgoyne from Keewatin. They were able to sing a few songs by the popular girl groups of the day, such as the Supremes and the Chiffons. A memorable event with these girls was playing at the annual radio patrol at the Kenora Legion. Unfortunately, the Temptations were only with us for a short period of time, as money was in short supply, with so many band members to pay, and out-of-town bookings were difficult to arrange, especially at their young ages, as often we'd have to stay overnight.
Many of the youth in this era spent time involved in the various teen clubs throughout the area. Kenora, Keewatin, Dryden, all had groups that promoted social interaction and entertainment, primarily through the music and the dance scene. Kenora's club was called the Canteenville and held meetings above Boston Pizza. Music and dances were not limited to our area, but rather anywhere in northwestern Ontario where the music was encouraged.
One day, we reached a turning point. John mentioned to all of us that at our dance the previous night, we looked like hell and sounded like hell. Just one of those off nights, I guess, but not something we could afford to take very lightly. I believe it was Wayne Cardinal who piped up and said, "Sounds like we should be called Satan and the Dmen." Well, that was it. No one knew what the name meant, but it sure sounded a lot more interesting than the Tempests. We were very fortunate to be able to acquire Russ from the XLs. With our complete sound, we recorded at Arbuthnot Studios in Winnipeg. Linda and She'll Lie would become our one and only 45 RPM recording. Not long after that, we found ourselves with a manager from Winnipeg who insisted that moving to the city would be much more beneficial regarding bookings. This we did, calling 887 Warsaw Avenue our home for the next year or more. One of our first appearances under our new manager was the Cavalcade of Stars, where we appeared to a sold-out crowd at the old Osborne Street Auditorium with 3 of Winnipeg's top bands. The Cavalcade also appeared in Portage la Prairie and Brandon, Manitoba.
We were quite proud of our Volkswagen minibus that we had. Had our band logo on the side of it. Often it could be found outside the Transcona's Pink Panther discotheque, but more often it was outside the mechanic's shop. It was a Volkswagen, mind you, and we blew about 3 motors in it, but it was a real neat thing. We would play the Pink Panther discotheque, where we would practice or play any nights when we weren't booked elsewhere. That could also often amount to 5 nights a week, with our pay being a hamburger, fries, and a drink. At that time, things couldn't have been any better, and we felt like all our practice and hard work had paid off. We were enjoying every minute of big city life. Our fan club, the music, the parties, the bands, and the girls. Satan and the Dmen were at the pinnacle of Winnipeg's label as the, quote, rock and roll capital of Canada.
We had made so much progress in such a short time that we were booked to open the show for the Rolling Stones' first Winnipeg appearance. However, yes,
Yeah.
due to one of the organizers having a relative in a band that was quite unknown at the time, we were replaced. It was something that could have been life-changing for Satan and the Dmen had we been left on the program. To make up for this heartbreaking loss, we were booked as backup band for Buddy Knox. After practicing at the Pink Panther Disco, we then appeared with Buddy at the Pink Panther, the Center in Portage la Prairie, the North End YMCA in Winnipeg, the Fourth Dimension nightclub in Thunder Bay, the Kenrisha Ballroom in Kenora, the Metropolitan Theatre in Winnipeg, and the high school in Birtle, Manitoba.
Talk about hot spots to play in, eh? Like, we're really moving up. Anyhow, Shayla Rat. This is one legend of the mid-'60s that must be mentioned, and that is the infamous Shayla Rat venue. It was the home of the Kenora Rowing Club, just over here, and was always adorned with rowing skulls on the walls and ceiling, and the open dock at the rear of the building right on Kenora Bay. More than one infectionado, anybody having a really good party, ended up at the end of that dock in the lake. That usually straightened things out rather quickly once they figured out that the Argyle was right beside there and all the Kenora sewage used to come in. So anyways, that's just here nor there. But anyways, many bands were brought in by the partnership of John Carwackey and Terry McClay, and during its heyday, there would be a band performing every night of the week, except Sundays, throughout the summer. Burton Cummings still remembers and mentions it to this day as the Guess Who played there more than a few times.
Now, shortly after the Buddy Knox tour, the group disbanded, and the members would go their own way to pursue their education and eventually get married and have families. Satan and the Dmen got back together in 1982 for Kenora's centennial and have played a couple of times each year since then, including 3 Harbor Fest appearances, the Kenora Curling Club, the Lake of the Woods Hotel, believe it or not. We hit them all. The Kenora Recreation Center, the Keewatin Arena, where we played to over 1,200 fans, the Keewatin Memorial Building, the Dryden Arena, Fort Vermilion in Vermilion Bay, the Royal George Hotel in Winnipeg, the Lilac Tourist Resort in Winnipeg, a rock and roll reunion of bands at the Winnipeg Convention Center, and on May 30th, 2015, we opened the show for Burton Cummings here in Kenora under the Whitecap Pavilion. In September of 2016, Satan and the Dmen played at what appeared to be their final dance at Cabin Jack's in Kenora after a marathon life of 54 years.
So on behalf of Terry and myself, I want to thank all of you for coming out this afternoon. And in conclusion, we hope the insights into a time of our lives through the stories have given you a glimpse into a great music era. I'll finish by making a poignant observation from legendary Bob Dylan. Quote, "Rock and roll hit me like a bomb. It exploded like the speed of light as it busted down the barriers that race, religion, and ideologies had put up." On behalf of Terry and myself, thank you very much for coming out, and thanks for listening to our story.
You fellows just want to stay seated. We'll take some questions.